Discover the amazing moment. How a simple question brought down a millionaire's pride forever. Jamie stood outside the local community center, clutching her son's hand as anticipation surged in the air. The harsh sunlight felt blistering against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the tighter grip of uncertainty in her chest. She had poured everything into being a protective mother while teaching high school science, yet all around them loomed a world where privilege overshadowed hard work. Today, Robert McAllister was coming. A man whose wealth seemed built not just on his business acumen, but rather on a disregard for those beneath him. Jamie felt the edges of her resolve fraying. Was her own relentless hustle matched even by a whisper in McAllister's world? As the doors finally creaked open, the crowd surged forward, and she could almost taste the desperation in their faces. Tommy was extraordinary, a brilliance that bloomed in dim corners, but today the weight of recognition pooled heavily over them both. Jamie sensed the imbalance, their struggles against McAllister's towering presence, the very voice of so-called success. With dark thoughts swirling, she wrestled with a gnawing fear that today would be like every other. They would return home, faces flushed with muted defeat, overshadowed by the complacent ease of the wealthy. While McAllister spoke, his smirk sharpened like a blade, slicing through the hopeful murmurs of the audience. Tommy stood silently at first, simmering with a cascade of emotions Jamie couldn't quite read. She clenched her teeth, wishing she could push the tide of her son's uncertainty somewhere safe and distant. He was a child on the cusp of brilliance, deserved of applause for his dedication to science, yet here they were, peripheral figures in a world that only celebrated the lavish. When Tommy's voice broke the rhythmic drone of McAllister's sermon, the air palpably shifted. How can you justify exploiting workers? The question hung heavily, the room thick with tension, and Jamie's breath caught as whispers rippled through the crowd like an unexpected chill. Pride welled inside her as she watched her son challenge the Titan, but fear followed swiftly. What if the trajectory of this encounter spiraled into consequences both of them feared to fathom? Before she could process the widening chasm of possibilities, McAllister's derisive laughter rang out, laced with contempt. Jamie's heart raced. Admiration and dread coursed through her. Should she intervene? What right did she have to shield Tommy? In that instant, the disdainful dismissal of the science fair felt like an attack on not just her son, but their entire existence. Her mind raced through sleepless nights, equations scribbled across kitchen tables, the endless encouragement that filled their space. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Tommy hesitated, catching his breath in the wave of uncertainty. And yet Jamie felt the heat within her igniting. She was determined now. What if they had something that could shift this entire narrative? A discovery that could resonate against McAllister's arrogance. As Tommy began to formulate his next thought, Jamie caught a fleeting expression on his face, a stubborn glint that told her he was ready to stand tall. But just as he opened his mouth, another voice rose somewhere in the crowd, challenging not just McAllister, but the very foundation of the community's values. The air was electric, and the unmistakable shift hung over them, poised to unleash a storm of conflicting truths. Jamie's heart thudded in her chest, conflict swirling within. Would they expose the discrepancy between privilege and true worth? Or would they crumble under the weight of established hierarchies? The ache of impending detonation loomed like a dark cloud, and in that charged silence, every future hung in the balance, waiting for someone to step forward. The tension in the room thickened, punctuated by a low murmur of disapproval and intrigue. Jamie could feel each heartbeat resonate not only within her breast, but also through the anxious crowd around her. Would the ignited spark of resolve burn bright enough to light a path through the shadows of dismay and disappointment? The heavy silence pressed against her ears, and she instinctively squeezed Tommy's hand tighter, a silent promise of support. Tommy's eyes flickered with determination, but Jamie saw the shadow of doubt creeping in. It was now or never. A fierce protectiveness surged within her, igniting her resolve as she prepared to forge a path for both herself and her son. Each moment spent watching McAllister's sneering expression was a reminder that wealth could create barriers, including the one that divided them from the opportunity to be heard. "Tommy, you can do this," she whispered, her voice steady, a propeller beneath his wings. He shot her a glance, the weight of her conviction bolstering his courage. Yet she knew that he had to find his own voice. "You think it's fair to profit from hard-working people, only to strip them of their livelihood?" Tommy's words sliced through the tension, echoing with an earnestness that replaced uncertainty. Jamie felt a surge of pride, mixed with the trepidation of how McAllister would react to such a public affront. McAllister's lips curled, but before he could retort, the rising voice of another figure in the crowd blared louder, a challenge to the ideals that had so long gone unchallenged. Each word, each clenching show of defiance felt electric, a possible uprising that had been simmering beneath the surface. As Jamie listened, her mind turned, conjuring an image of her near-empty classroom, the faces of the students who shared Tommy's passion, who craved recognition. Faceless challenges had long haunted her, those nagging thoughts that screamed of inadequacy. Yet now, navigating through this moment of intellectual clash, she could also feel the possibility of latent potential awakening not only in Tommy, but also within herself. "Maybe we won't just be heard, but also recognized," she considered, just as whispers of agreement rippled through the audience. If Tommy could challenge McAllister, maybe she could too. Could she confront her own fears of being just a teacher, just a mother? Suddenly, she envisioned herself standing boldly, defending her son's right to question authority, not just for him but for herself. Sweat began to trickle down her back, and she hesitated as her mind painted images of retribution. What if they faced backlash, humiliation? But then she saw the steely resolve in Tommy's eyes as he faced McAllister head-on, fueled by the energy swirling in the atmosphere. "What are you cowardly afraid of? The truth?" Another voice emerged, joining the chorus of dissent. Jamie's heart leaped. The crowd began to rally around Tommy, emboldened by his bravery, unraveling the exclusivity that wealth wielded as a weapon. Glancing at her son, Jamie caught a glimpse of something she desperately wanted for him. The belief that fighting for what is right would carry weight far beyond this moment. She realized her insecurities had held her back for too long. She made a decision: to stand alongside her son, to elevate not just their voices, but the voices of those who felt powerless. Just then, she realized McAllister was visibly rattled. His mask of confidence began to slip. The atmosphere morphed from one of exclusivity to one of empowerment, a transformation spurred by Tommy's defiance. She inhaled slowly, the space around them electrified by the unexpected, pushing her own preconceptions to the back of her mind. Sensing this collective power, Jamie whispered back to Tommy, "Let's finish what we started." Adrenaline coursed through her veins, excitement and fear intermixed as they prepared to push against a collapsing facade. The moment surged forth with limitless possibilities, overwhelming yet exhilarating. They could seize this opportunity to transform their standing, not just against McAllister, but against every established norm that had held them down. Jamie felt empowered, a resurgence of strength flowing through her, ready to defend not just for Tommy, but also for their future. Yet just as they readied to vocalize their united front, a startling realization dawned upon Jamie. What if exposing McAllister's tactics spun beyond their control? As uncertainty loomed just beyond their grasp, Jamie prepared herself for the possibility that this confrontation might unravel more than just hidden truths. Would they merely scratch the surface? Or could they unearth the foundation of everything that had held others in bondage? The palpable charge of tension in the air promised discoveries ahead, leaving their fate hanging in the balance as they took their collective stand. As the murmurs of discontent grew louder, Jamie felt the crowd's anticipation swell around her. Tommy stood resolute, his youthful expression a mixture of defiance and curiosity, an embodiment of the fight deep within them both. What had started as a timid whisper had blossomed into a clarion call, urging her to confront her own self-doubt. She leaned closer to Tommy, determination seeping into her words. "Let's show them the truth," she urged, her voice a steady whisper meant only for his ears. But inside, her thoughts rambled, the cacophony of anxiety and resolve merging into an overwhelming tide. Could she really carry this fight forward? Would her voice stand strong amidst the fierce winds of criticism that might follow? Tommy's eyes shone brighter as he turned to her. "Do you think people will take us seriously?" His trepidation was evident, yet something shifted in the air, a new layer of strength as others rallied around them. They could no longer be merely spectators. They were the catalysts of change, even if that change led to uncertain consequences. It struck Jamie then, the inherent irresponsibility of inaction. McAllister's empire thrived on silence, on acceptance of the status quo. As the man began to speak, the words dripped with contempt. "You think you can interrupt my authority with a few childish taunts?" he sneered. But the tremor in his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. "No more games," Jamie murmured, breaking free from her hesitations. The realization that confronting McAllister was not just about fighting for Tommy, but also about her own autonomy, solidified her purpose. Her hand tightened in Tommy's, not out of fear, but as an unyielding signal of solidarity. It was time to reclaim their narrative. As McAllister continued to berate the crowd, Jamie felt a rising heat. Perhaps she was more than just a teacher or a mother. Maybe she was a force to be reckoned with. "McAllister, your influence is built on exploiting fear," she called out, her voice slicing through the crowd's murmurs like a shard of ice. A few heads turned in surprise to her sudden boldness, and for a moment, she felt a thrill of invincibility. The crowd surged with her, and she could see it. A chain reaction ignited by her refusal to cower. Yet, as they rallied, a gnawing fear gripped her. Could one moment of courage spiral into chaos? The stakes were crystal clear. Standing against McAllister meant potentially rippling into areas of their lives they'd have preferred shielding from confrontation. It was the double-edged sword of truth. While it could liberate, it also bore the potential for ruin. What if her and Tommy's voices demanded retribution, inviting retaliation against them? She had witnessed firsthand the consequences of standing out, not just as a teacher trying to inspire students, but as a woman challenging societal constructs that seemed unassailable. "I won't let them silence us." Tommy's voice erupted beside her, fueling the energy in the room. Jamie felt a rush of pride, but the undercurrent of fear still ebbed at her resolve. She could train her students to question authority. She could inspire them to dream. Yet here, in this moment, her own dreams of a safe life seemed precarious, threatened by the very act of rising together. Sometimes speaking the truth means risking everything, she thought, calculating her next move amidst the roiling sea of humanity around her. But there was something more, something else she discovered in the heartbeat of that moment. Perhaps alongside fear, there was also empowerment. For the first time, she felt the potential of her own identity bursting forth, eager to embrace a future she had long shied away from. With her head held high, Jamie understood that resistance was not merely a fight against McAllister. It was a reclamation of her narrative, a step towards becoming the example she always aspired to be for her students, and most importantly, for Tommy. As she prepared to echo Tommy's earlier challenge longer and louder, a new figure emerged from the crowd. An old acquaintance, someone who had known her during her early teaching days, who had left the profession in search of a seemingly safer path. The familiar face now wore an expression of quiet understanding, Yet Jamie sensed the underlying critique. What will you dare to risk? The room fell silent as she faced this unexpected reminder of her past. Jamie's heart raced as she weighed their shared history against the boldness of her present, leaving her poised at the crossroads of doubt and determination. The moment had come to confront more than just McAllister. It would demand she untangle old narratives and reweave her identity. "How far are you willing to go?" the voice inside quipped. Jamie's throat tightened as she realized this was not merely a confrontation of words, but a confrontation of self. With everything on the line, she had to decide. Would she seize the moment and unleash the power of her truth, or retreat back into the shadows of familiarity? As she raised her voice once more, the uncertainty loomed large. Every choice behind her and in front of her was poised to alter the trajectory of their lives forever. With the weight of anticipation hanging heavily in the air, Jamie inhaled deeply, attempting to ground herself amidst the swirling chaos of her thoughts. The familiar face from her past felt like an anchor and an adversary all at once, a reminder of the choices she had made, or failed to make. Will you choose the red pill of truth or the blue pill of compliance? The metaphor seemed absurd, yet strikingly relevant. She had been long conditioned to coexist with fear, to teach others without stepping into her own power. The echo of McAllister's derision lingered in her mind, driving home the concept that silence had always been her safest option. But now, that very silence felt like a betrayal of everything she aimed to represent. Hands trembling slightly, Jamie transformed the tension in her body into strength. What do you really want? She asked herself the question, searching for her authentic answer beyond the external pressures. Would impressing McAllister serve her ambitions? Would it foster growth in her students or Richard, her old acquaintance who outwardly seemed successful but had stepped back from confronting the status quo? The encouraging rumble of the crowd pressed around her, an unsettling reminder that she would not face this battle alone. They were her students, her community, unknowingly tethered to her journey. Their expectation thrust a burgeoning confidence through her. Perhaps speaking truthfully about her fears was radical enough to inspire others. Did risk then contain the power to alter the narrative? Are you not just a teacher? The persistent voice of doubt challenged, mocking her resolve. I am more than that, Jamie countered, recalling the discomfort of gray lessons, superficial frustrations, and the reality of unyielding hierarchy she had previously accepted. The personal development she craved, the example she wished to set, demanded a reckoning that enveloped her entire being. Are you ready to stand before your doubts? The past whispered through Richard's watchful eyes, laden with history. It would be easy to falter here, to shrink back into the mundane, but this was an opportunity to redefine everything she had refrained from embracing. Her aspirations, her disappointments, her unfocused ambitions now bubbling under the surface, needing release. I am ready, Jamie declared, feeling the intensity of her emotion ripple through those assembled before her. With the authority of conviction sparking inside her, she unleashed her voice once more, this time bolder. I refuse to follow a path paved with silence imposed by fear and sham. The words shot from her lips like arrows, finding their targets with uncanny precision. For a heartbeat, the crowd simmered with electric energy. Each individual absorbed the essence of her message, the urgency of her truth, like oxygen igniting flames of resistance. A transformation was in motion, her inner strength weaving through the hearts of those witnessing her evolution. Amidst the intensity, however, her attention flickered back to McAllister, whose face had contorted into a mask of incredulity. The veneer of control he had maintained for so long was starting to shatter, and Jamie sensed the tides shifting, both around her and within herself. She was no longer just voicing outrage, she was declaring her own authority. The fundamental question had surfaced in the air. How much were they willing to fight for their self-worth? And could she truly lead this charge? Sensing the shift toward confrontation, Jamie felt her resolve deepen, yet uncertainty stirred again. Each step forward propelled her toward an unfamiliar territory that promised transformation, but threatened to crack open deeper confrontations with those who regarded her as merely a teacher. Would her courage alienate some, or inspire a collective awakening? Before she could join the collective surge of unity ignited by her words, Richard stepped forward, challenging the room with an outstretched hand. "Is it truly worth it, Jamie? What will you gain by putting everything on the line?" The question felt like a thunderclap, reverberating within her. The tension peak, Jamie understood. It was no longer just a matter of standing against McAllister. The real stake was her commitment to redefining herself amid the uncertainties that awaited. The choice before her took shape, demanding a decisive push. It was time to confront not just McAllister's authority, but the very walls she had built within her own mind. As the room held its breath, she steeled herself, ready to fight, for the truth, for her students, and ultimately, for the new identity she was daring to seize. But with Richard's question echoing in her mind, the awareness of liability loomed overhead. How far was she willing to go? She had to draw from everything inside her before plunging fully into the demands of this moment, and the unfolding uncertainty lay ahead as shadows backed by bright possibility. The challenge hung in the air, tangible and charged with potential. Jamie's heart raced, not only from adrenaline but from the realization that she was standing at a crossroads, one that could reshape her identity as a teacher and, ultimately, as a person. Every doubt, every fear she had ever entertained stood in defiance before her, but so too did the flickering flame of courage that had ignited within her during her declaration. "Is it truly worth it?" Richard's words whispered like an oath, looping through her mind as she struggled to nail down a response that would suffice, not only for him but for the crowd watching with bated breath. "What will you gain by putting everything on the line?" Focusing on Richard's piercing gaze, Jamie wrestled with the implications of his question. She had always played it safe in her career, adhering to protocols, adhering to complacency, and in doing so, she had silenced herself. But currently, the weight of that silence felt like a prison. How much more could she endure? The very act of allowing herself to be seen was daunting. A voice deep within summoned her thoughts. "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." Steeling herself, Jamie envisioned the possibilities. What if breaking the chains of her past empowered her students to embrace their own authenticity? What if her transformation illuminated a path for others caught in the shadows of doubt? "I choose to stand," she breathed, the words almost escaping her before she had the chance to analyze their depth. And like that, her decision solidified within her. She had to rise above that which kept her shackled. The risk was palpable, but it was time to confront both McAllister and her own limitations. Gathering her thoughts, she seized the moment, channeling her energy toward McAllister, whose incredulous expression soured with discomfort. This isn't merely about confrontation, it's about vulnerability and the courage to change. Each syllable she spoke came from a place of raw honesty, a stark contrast to the polished veneer she had worn for far too long. As her words rippled through the audience, Jamie felt a shift, a merging of tension and hope in the room. No longer merely a teacher imparting knowledge, she was an agent of change, someone who dared to confront both her own fear and authority figures that were content with the status quo. "Can anyone truly grow under the thumb of fear?" she continued, gaining momentum, inhaling strength from the collective breaths around her. Igniting her own passion, she began to shed remnants of self-doubt. Richard's brows furrowed, but now not solely in skepticism. There was recognition in his eyes, and for the first time, it radiated warmth. "You are more than qualified to challenge the status quo," he said, his voice low but firm. "But understand the winds of change come with turbulence." The challenge was clear, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Jamie felt the gravity of his words, but also the electrifying thrill of potential. What she stood to lose, was tied intimately to the very identity she had been trying to forge. Would this newfound clarity lead to isolation, or would it build connections based on authenticity? The crowd watched attentively, their collective energy heightened. Jamie made eye contact with several students she had mentored, their expressions reflecting her fears and aspirations alike. The compact between them felt profound, and she realized that she wasn't just speaking for herself, but for those who had long desired transformation in their own lives. Resolving to move forward, she felt resolved, unearthing a boldness that propelled her. We aren't defined by our past and the expectations of those in power. We can reshape our narrative, embrace our truth. Who is willing to break free? As the words flowed, Jamie sensed a rush coursing through her veins, a palpable shift that laid bare the walls she had allowed to confine her for too long. Yet with that sense of liberation also came a newfound clarity about the stakes she was willing to confront. McAllister's expression had transformed. The facade of indifference gave way to irritation, mixed with a hint of apprehension. Jamie recognized that a confrontation was simmering just beneath the surface, and suddenly the weight of her convictions bore down upon both of them. This moment was crucial. Who would yield first? How far was she willing to push? Determined, she prepared herself for the fight to come, anticipating the response from McAllister. But more pressingly, she felt the anticipation of those around her, eager for transformation. As her resolve crystallized, her heart pounded with the knowledge that the outcome was uncertain, and she would soon face the ultimate question. Was this fight for truth worth the risk of confrontation? But even amidst that flourishing resolve, a realization struck her as clear as glass. She might just be teetering on the brink of a defining moment that would leave a lasting impact, not only on her, but on the very fabric of the world she inhabited. Now, she thought, it's time to face the music. Would she stand solidly in her truth, or would the tide of opposition prove overwhelming? The confrontation was imminent, and all her growth was about to be tested. The silence stretched as Jamie braced herself for McAllister's response. The air crackled, heavy with tension, and a whirlwind of unspoken words. Every eye in the room seemed to shift toward their confrontation, a collective breath held as if about to plunge into an electric plunge. Would he dismiss her once more, or engage in a dialogue that could either shatter or solidify their uneasy dynamics? McAllister's lips twisted into a sardonic smile, masking the uncertainty that echoed in the depths of his gaze. You think you can disrupt years of order with mere words? His voice dripped with condescension, but Jamie could sense a crack in his facade. This was no longer just about authority. This was personal. That's precisely the point, she shot back, her pulse racing, emboldened by her newfound clarity. Words have the power to ignite change, to challenge perspectives. What's more dangerous, questioning the way things are, or remaining complacent in ignorance? With each word, Jamie navigated the fragile landscape of her authority and conviction, noticing how the crowd shifted, visibly leaning toward her. It was a delicate dance she never anticipated, intertwining her growth with the expectations placed upon her. The spotlight illuminated vulnerabilities she once dreaded revealing, yet here she stood, unwilling to retreat. McAllister narrowed his eyes, clearly taken aback by her confidence. Are you prepared for the consequences of your audacity? He replied sharply, his voice betraying an undercurrent of uncertainty. The question hung in the air, a weighty challenge that echoed Jamie's own internal turmoil. How far could she go? What was she truly risking? Yet the more he pushed, the more her determination solidified like steel. Conformity breeds stagnation. If I must weather a storm to uphold a vision for my students, to empower them to think critically and pursue their passions, it's a storm I'll embrace. His features hardened in disbelief. The gathering room seemed to hum with the immediacy of the moment. Jamie sensed a palpable shift. She was no longer an isolated entity, but part of a collective energy, a surge fueled by mutual awakening. Thoughts of failure flirted with her resolve, yet she firmly rooted herself in the conviction that this was necessary. The glances exchanged among her students reflected their aspirations and fears. They craved authenticity, something she was slowly learning to embrace. McAllister's frown deepened, and Jamie saw the calculations running through his mind, weighing the consequences of a shift in power dynamics. "I admire your will, Jamie," he said, his challenging tone softening slightly. "But this isn't a game. There's a reason the status quo remains." "That's precisely why we must disrupt it," she interjected, feeling the energy push her more into the light. "Everything you've built relies on silence and compliance. Will you maintain this status quo at the expense of genuine progress?" Each word pulled from her the weight of past fears, but subverted them into assertions of strength. As the room absorbed her declarations, she felt the echo of her earlier self. Hesitant, restrained, unable to voice her truths candidly. It didn't matter how it had been before. What mattered was the person she was committing to be, the values she was now willing to embody. The conflict manifested as a duality in her. The woman who feared repercussions clashing with the version of herself unearthing resilience. Just when it seemed McAllister might relent, a flicker of fury flickered across his face as he swung back into defensive mode. "You're killing your career, Jamie. The board won't tolerate this display." The threat hung heavy in the air. The implications were clear, and doubt dared to dance on the edges of her resolve. But beneath the surface of her uncertainty, a quiet whisper surged, drowning out fear. The crowd shifted again, murmurs of encouragement seeping into the atmosphere. Jamie's heart raced, felt the warmth of those who hungered for change. It was electric, pushing away the tendrils of doubt that sought to restrain her. "Then perhaps," she countered, "it's time for a reconsideration of what leadership truly embodies. Rather than suppressing voices, shouldn't we welcome them? Isn't that the hallmark of true courage?" Each heartbeat drummed a rhythm of clarity. It was not just about her, but a clearer vision for what education could mean. It beckoned those listening into a narrative of their own, one where they could discover their voice amidst the noise. As the moment expanded, an unexpected realization dawned. She was ready, both for the confrontation with McAllister and the turmoil that came with it, regardless of the stakes involved. In that instant, everything felt possible. Proverbial doors creaked as they edged open, offering glimpses of new paths waiting to be explored. Would she step through, or would she retreat into the shadows of her former limitations? "Then let's rewrite this narrative together," she challenged, her voice steady, eyes locking onto McAllister's. The stakes had never felt higher, but he merely smirked, revealing the simmering conflict lurking just below the surface. "Count on it, Jamie." As the weight of his response sank in, tension enveloped her like a heavy cloak. The crossroads had undeniably shifted. Whatever lay ahead, the path toward her growth would be fraught with challenge and transformation. Each step forward became a question, and with it loomed an undeniable truth. What price would Jamie pay for this new chapter? The confrontation had ignited a fire within, but where would its flames lead her next? The room crackled with an unsettled energy, the faces around Jamie shifting slowly, some reflecting support, others uncertainty. McAllister, however, remained resolute, calculating his next move as if plotting a chess game. Jamie could almost hear the thoughts whirring behind his stony facade. Did he underestimate her? She was resolved to push further. The confrontation was not merely a tussle for authority, but a deeply personal battle that signified her own evolution. "Jamie," his voice was silk over steel, "you might think this is about the students, but it's about control. You're naive if you think you can change an institution like this by simply speaking out." Naive? The word struck a nerve. She could feel the heat rising in her chest. Was this her naivety or his arrogance? She took a deep breath, grounding herself. Confidence, she reminded herself, was not an absence of fear, but the decision to act in its presence. Every revolution starts with a single voice. Her certainty surged forward, although doubt whispered in the back of her mind. If control is all we have, then it's a precarious existence indeed. What happens when those who are controlled decide they've had enough? Her heart raced, catalyzed by each individual gaze locked on her, their hopes feeding her resolve. Though she prepared for retaliation, McAllister's demeanor shifted. His eyes narrowed, revealing a glimmer of something beneath the surface. Was it fear? Concerns for his legacy? She seized the moment, pushing onward as if riding a wave she had created. Every single day that we discourage questions, we extinguish curiosity. As educators, we are meant to nurture the thinkers of tomorrow, not stifle them. She paused, letting her words sink in. If progress is the goal, then we cannot cower in the shadows of complacency. As she articulated her thoughts, Jamie felt an unexpected rush of adrenaline. Each sentence became a stepping stone in her development, challenging her capabilities and forcing her to confront the layers of self-doubt she'd previously accepted. The shadows of her past began to dissipate, revealing a brighter, more assertive future. Yet McAllister didn't falter. And when the board sees this insubordination, they won't hesitate to strip you of your position. You're not just jeopardizing your career. You're putting those students you claim to protect at risk. His words echoed, finding resonance within her as doubts began to surface. The stakes were incredibly high, and a heavy silence fell around them once more, thick with apprehension. Would she really risk it all? For the sake of an idea? Perhaps, Jamie flicked back. It's time to take that risk. If I don't stand for my beliefs now, I'll drown in a sea of regret later. Is that a price worth paying? The confrontation became more than just words. It was a reckoning of values. She felt sharper now, as if each sentence punctured deeper into the fabric of her convictions. The crowd shifted again, murmurs igniting like wildfire, voices rallying around the audacity of her challenge. Jamie could see it in their eyes, the stirring of empowerment. She was no longer just addressing McAllister. She was speaking to them all, ushering in a potential transformation that was as much about renewal in herself as it was about changing the environment around her. In that moment, the power dynamics altered entirely. Who held the authority? The one who spoke loudest, or the one who listened patiently? Jamie's resolve crystallized. She might be risking everything, but the vision for change held greater weight than her personal fears of failure. You raise good points, McAllister. She softened the tone for a brief heartbeat, allowing him to believe he had some measure of control. But my passion for this change outweighs any job title or position. With her heart thumping heavily, she watched as McAllister opened his mouth, clearly caught off guard. This was what she had wanted. Dialogue. A slice of conversation that could, perhaps, evolve into something deeper. Just as he began to respond, a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere told Jamie that the moment was about to alter once more, tension crackling in the air. What happens when those questions demand answers? He retorted sharply, pulling back the intensity. What lies in the darkness could swallow us whole. For Jamie, that question loomed, stark and sharp. But within stood the promise of her growth, the possibility of reshaping her narrative. The true challenge was not merely confronting McAllister, but embracing the uncertainties of this newfound journey. As their eyes locked, she felt, no, she knew. It was not just a career on the line, but the very essence of what it meant to become the leader she was destined to be. But in the recesses of her mind, another question lingered, sharpened by uncertainty. Was she ready to face whatever lay behind that darkness? The mere idea stirred a whirlwind of emotions as she prepared to confront not just McAllister, but the potential fallout of her own bold assertions. The air felt charged with tension, as McAllister's words echoed around Jamie, reverberating through the room like a warning bell. What lies in the darkness could swallow us whole. The implication struck her hard. His metaphor hinted not just at his fear, but at hers as well. What was she really afraid of? Was it losing her job, her reputation, or was it the idea that she might fail to stand for something she believed in? Jamie's heartbeat quickened, each thump a reminder of the stakes at hand. She wanted to spear through the doubts gnawing at her resolve. The collective eyes of her colleagues, once a source of apprehension, morphed into a mirroring reflection of her determination. That sudden shift felt empowering. It was no longer just her versus McAllister, but an entire community against an outdated paradigm. Inside her, a storm brewed. Caution whispered that she might be walking into a trap. However, she couldn't shake the stirring inside, the knowledge that confrontation was necessary for true growth. Pushing back, she leaned into the moment, drawing strength from her vulnerability. "What are we afraid of, McAllister? Is it knowledge? Is it progress? Because I believe that ignorance is the real enemy." Each word fired with conviction, cutting through the fog of uncertainty that had shadowed the room since the meeting began. The traditional structures felt stifling, a cage designed to keep the status quo intact. She was done living within its confines. There was no turning back now. Everything inside her urged her to embrace the tension, to confront it head-on. The room awaited her next move, and within that charged silence, Jamie decided to reveal not just her passion, but her vulnerability. "We all know the stakes, but I refuse to let fear dictate our purpose. If we want to bring about change, the price of discomfort cannot scare us off. We cannot remain silent out of fear of what lies ahead." McAllister's expression shifted as he absorbed her words, and for the first time, a hint of uncertainty crossed his features. Did he see her tenacity as a formidable threat? The flicker of doubt felt nearly exhilarating for Jamie. It was affirmation that her voice was being heard, that perhaps she was stirring something deeper within the institution. With renewed confidence, Jamie continued, "Every moment we hesitate is another moment we deny our responsibility as educators. Our students deserve leaders who challenge the status quo, not who cower behind it. We must ask the hard questions, face the uncomfortable facts." As she spoke, memories of her own educational experiences flooded her mind. Those who failed to engage when it mattered, and those rare instances when a teacher ignited curiosity and passion in her. Those defining moments had the power to shift futures. She had the same opportunity now, not just for herself, but for her students and colleagues. Suddenly, a chilling realization struck her. What if the darkness McAllister warned about wasn't external, but internal? What if it symbolized the very doubts and fears that threatened to undermine her voice? It was clarity born from chaos, and she had to fight through this darkness to forge a new path. This was her reckoning. "Change doesn't come from comfort," she stated, the urgency elevating her voice. "It thrives where there is struggle, where there is risk. I'm not asking for the easy path. I'm advocating for the necessary one." With every sentence, she felt herself evolving, shedding layers of doubt that had bound her. Each conviction fortified her resolve. Even if she faced retaliation from McAllister and the board, she was tired of living in the shadow of fear. But just as she began to believe that the tides were turning, McAllister's smile twisted into a smirk, and an undercurrent of menace cut through the air. "And what, Jamie, will you do when this so-called change costs you everything?" His question landed heavy, the chaos within her heart colliding with the reality of risk. Jamie took in a sharp breath, fully aware that every revolution has its casualties. But this one, her revolution, would not be about fear or resignation. She locked eyes with him, unwavering. "Then let it cost everything. A leader rises only when they are willing to lose what holds them back." The room fell silent, constricting around them. Jamie could feel the weight of all those watching, their collective breaths holding at that moment. But it was clear. This confrontation was only the beginning. She still had to navigate the turbulent waters ahead, far from knowing what lay in store. As she steadied herself for McAllister's response, a new thought emerged unbidden. What if, in this struggle, She discovered not just a leader's voice, but a profound truth about who she was meant to be. The uncertainty loomed, but rather than panic, she felt a spark of anticipation. The challenges to come were formidable, but the journey was just beginning. Would the price be worth the reward? The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, wrapping around Jamie's senses as she held her ground against McAllister's gloating stare. Every muscle in her body tensed, a visceral reaction to the stakes presented. Would the price truly be everything she had? The thought buzzed in her mind, but beneath the uncertainty, a more profound energy surged through her, compelling her forward. As the silence enveloped the room, Jamie felt the heat of her own convictions. She had never envisioned herself becoming the protagonist in a battle against the status quo. In fact, just a few months ago, she had been quietly compliant, trailing behind established norms. But now, her transformation ignited a fire within, challenging her to redefine her boundaries and assumptions. McAllister leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, searching for a crack in her resolve. "Your idealism is commendable but misplaced, Jamie. How naive to think you can shift the paradigm with words alone," he taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. Yet instead of shrinking under his gaze, Jamie found clarity in his challenge. "Words are only the beginning, McAllister. We need them to mobilize thought and action. We need them to inspire courage." Her voice no longer wavered. It steadied her, each statement more potent than the last. With every syllable, she released a part of the fear that had gripped her for too long, and in its place, empowerment took root. But the need to step up demanded a personal evolution. What was the essence of her leadership? Questions flooded her thoughts. Did she emulate inspirational figures, or would she carve her distinct path? To believe in change required something deeper, a willingness to explore her vulnerabilities and strengths. After years of avoiding confrontation, Jamie realized she hadn't truly tapped into her potential. McAllister may have meant to intimidate her, but now she grasped an essential truth. Articulating her vision would require more than just bravery. It would necessitate a commitment to discovering who she was beneath the surface. She began to map the terrain of her fears. It wasn't merely the professional implications that held her back. It was also the fear of self-discovery, the risk of realizing passions that could ignite new pathways she had not previously imagined. What if she found her purpose was more radical than she anticipated? What if she became the very leader her field required? In that moment of reflection, a new confidence burgeoned within her. The stakes were personal, yet they also invited an exploration of ideas that she had kept at bay. How often had she buried dissenting thoughts to fit in? "The true cost of change," she asserted, eyes locked on McAllister, "will be if we fail to nurture the kind of leaders our future needs." As her colleagues exchanged glances, some filled with apprehension, others with a flicker of hope, Jamie felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere. This was not just her battle. This was a collective yearning for evolution. Yet, she had to be cautious. Navigating the turbulent waters meant testing her emerging voice against potential backlash. Just then, a thought broke through the fog of her reverie, a bold query that tumbled forth. If not me, then who will take the first step to challenge the darkness? What lies in front of us today is a choice, and I choose to fight. It was a declaration, her personal manifesto emerging from the shadows. Turning to face McAllister fully, she tossed the gauntlet down. But as soon as she did, doubt fluttered at the edges of her mind. Would her audacity lead to her downfall? The machinations of consequence tightened the air around them again. Jamie's pulse quickened, aware that each choice henceforth held the potential to shatter her boundaries or confine her within them. Their eyes locked, a battle of wills brimming with tension. Then McAllister spoke, voice slow and deliberately chilling. "You think standing up here defines your courage, but I assure you, the real trial lies ahead. Will you still sing your anthem for change when the music dims?" Questions roiled within her, evoking both dread and exhilaration. Jamie exhaled slowly, the path before her now etched with uncertainty, but illuminated by her resolve. She felt a newly forged sense of purpose, but beyond the immediate confrontation stood a vast landscape of challenges awaiting her. Would her fight against the conventional grant her the answers she sought, or strip her of everything she'd built? As the room brimmed with unspoken tension, she understood this was merely the beginning of her journey. Surrounded by shadows, she was ready to explore what lay beyond them. Because deep down, she knew the greatest discovery would not just be about change, it would be about herself. What she uncovered could either set her free or ensnare her forever. The question loomed: where would it lead her next? In the moments that followed, Jamie felt the room shift beneath her feet, the collective anticipation hanging thick in the air as McAllister's words lingered like the heavy scent of smoke after a fire. The challenge he posed settled deep into her psyche. Will you still sing your anthem for change when the music dims? With that question echoing, Jamie inhaled purposefully. She stood firm, no longer the hesitant teacher trailing behind the weight of her self-doubt. She had unearthed a fierce determination, and a fire burned in her core, a fire kindled by the thought that sparking change was not merely about unearthing truths. It was about embracing her own narrative of power and identity. She decided she would no longer allow the looming shadows of fear to dictate her choices. Each step I take towards change does indeed come with consequences, she declared, locking her gaze with McAllister's. But if I step back now, what lesson would that teach the very students I strive to empower? As she spoke, something extraordinary surged within her. Recognition of her strength and her role transcended beyond mere confrontation. It was about igniting a movement within her students and colleagues, a clarion call for courage to pierce the silence engendered by fear. She could feel it, the shift in the energy around her. Eyes that once reflected uncertainty now shone with encouragement. Her colleagues leaned closer, drawn into the orbit of her commitment to challenge the status quo. It drove her to dig even deeper. I do not stand alone in this moment. Each of us here holds the potential to be catalysts for change, and if that requires courage to confront fears, then we must embrace it. McAllister's demeanor faltered, a flicker of something vulnerable flashing across his countenance. Was that fear? Doubt? Perhaps he realized she was no longer just a voice to dismiss. The students, bright, eager minds who craved validation, began to respond. One voice, then another, rose from the audience, emboldened by Jamie's defiance. They echoed her sentiments, forming the beginnings of a chorus that resonated through the hall. The room swelled with strength as Jamie continued. To challenge is to seek progress, and it requires vulnerability. But it is within that vulnerability that we find our greatest strength. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, each heartbeat aligning with the momentum building around her. With each phrase, she felt liberated from the grip of her doubts. Those reservations, once weighty shackles, began to lift. Here stood a fierce advocate, a mother, a teacher willing to risk everything for the clarity of her convictions. Jamie had transformed from a woman paralyzed by fear into an articulate champion for change. A low murmur of agreement rose from the students, rallying in support of her declaration. McAllister's facade began to crack as awareness dawned. Each word she spoke was pulling back the curtain from his carefully constructed empire built on fear and compliance. Your reign is built on silence, she challenged, feeling profound courage pulse through her veins. This path requires us to break free from old chains. If we wish to grow, we must first dare to be uncomfortable. The darkness is only as powerful as we allow it to be. McAllister's eyes widened, an indication that he was beginning to see the tides shifting around him. Real power emanated not solely from wealth, but from conscience and community, the very core values he seemingly disregarded. In that pivotal moment, Jamie realized what had once been an insurmountable wall had transformed into a bridge. The journey through self-awareness manifested itself into clarity, and as she continued to speak, it became evident that her fight was no longer just for herself. It was for her son, her students, an interwoven aspiration for collective empowerment. Somewhere amidst the tension, Jamie felt a smile break across her face as liberation flooded her heart. A victory born not just from confronting McAllister, but from embracing her identity, understanding her power, and sharing that knowledge with others. She stepped forward, encouraged by the tide of voices rallying behind her. "Let us collectively embrace something greater than fear," she asserted, drawing strength from the groundswell of support bubbling around her. "Together, we can reshape not only ourselves, but also the environments our children will inherit. Change is possible, and it starts here." And then, like a wave cresting, the room erupted with applause. The previously fearful faces of colleagues transformed into expressions of solidarity, each beat of recognition fueling her spirit. McAllister's authority wavered. The steadfast grip of power he had wielded began to dissolve. In that visceral moment of growth, Jamie recognized her own sinews of resilience. Her voice found footing alongside others, and she had emerged not only as a defender of her ideals, but as a leader in her own right. She had proven to herself that when rooted in purpose, obstacles transform into stepping stones. As the clamor of applause filled the air, she looked at Tommy nearby, his wide eyes reflecting both admiration and pride. He had witnessed her growth, her commitment to confronting barriers, and she hoped it would inspire him on his own journey of empowerment. In that shared victory, she realized the profound connection that bound them together. They had both tapped into their potential as changemakers. Though the future remained uncertain, Jamie knew with unwavering confidence that she would face it head-on. She might stumble, but she would rise, and with each step, she would embody the very lessons she sought to impart. This wasn't just a culmination of confrontation, it was an awakening. Jamie had truly demonstrated her metamorphosis. She stood tall, solid confidence coursing through her being, ready to forge ahead, knowing, after everything, she had found her voice, and through its resonance, she would help inspire countless others to discover their own. Now was the moment to seize the victory of individual consciousness and commitment, a collective awakening ignited from personal resolve. If you've been inspired by Jamie's journey, you need to subscribe now to join more incredible stories of personal transformation. Leave a like now to fuel the algorithm that supports these powerful narratives. We want to hear your thoughts. Comment your theories about Jamie's journey and what it means to stand for change. And remember, don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to feel the strength of overcoming hardships. Your support can help spread the message of resilience and empowerment.